Pioneering English artist Brian Eno's definitive foray into ambient music coincided with the release of his 1978 album titled Ambient 1, Music for Airports. In the record's liner notes, he writes that ambient must be able to accommodate many levels of listening attention without enforcing one in particular. It must be as ignorable as it is interesting. Eno's statement is almost 50 years old now, yet ambient enthusiasts still debate how to classify certain works. To me, the meditative and atmospheric qualities that arise when engaging with slow cinema are akin to experiencing ambient music, and the struggle to delineate a set of criteria for each contributes to the multisensory impact they hold. This video is the second entry in the Ambient Cinema Canon, a continuous series on this channel in which we explore the intricacies of the genre, its importance to me, and various topics on its relation to avant-garde cinema. Australian musician Lawrence English continues to amass a staggering discography within the genre. A frequent collaborator with ambient/ambient adjacent experimental artists like Merzbow, William Basinski, Uboa, and Xiu Xiu, English's use of drones in field recordings is reminiscent of evoking specific sensory phenomena. In his piece, Notes Toward a Future Ambient, he writes, "Ambient is never a documentation of somewhere or sometime. Instead, it creates an individuated, impressionistic, and imagined place. It is realized in between our internal and external selves." Not everyone will agree on a set definition of slow cinema. There is nothing wrong with calling a film slow, despite it not being recognized as part of the movement, and vice versa. Most slow cinema films do not follow a set narrative structure and instead use long takes, sparse dialogue, and feature non-professional actors. It is especially important not to equate long duration or lack of narrative with slowness. For instance, I find Marguerite Duraz's 1 hour and 55-minute long film India Song to be significantly slower than Bela Tarr's 7 hour and 19-minute long behemoth Satan Tango. The two aforementioned examples offer less room for personal interpretation than non-narrative cinema, which can overlap with slow cinema on certain occasions. Slowness is utilized to elicit varying forms of attention from the spectator, allowing for an amorphous style of perception to take root in one's mind. This renders itself visible through the examination of what I dub the attention spectrum, where an individual's conscious and unconscious interaction and subsequent response to stimuli is defined by the shifting modes of passive and active engagement. This spectrum is not always linear and can overlap circularly. Repeated engagement with slow cinema will influence the nebulous reaction that arises when watching a film, where additional non-diegetic information and cognition of material processes switch on and off, encouraging emotional examination. Ambient music also retains this sensibility. Significance can arise via passive engagement, functioning as a tool that directs the listener to shape the experience through a dialectical, active acknowledgement of passiveness. The word ignorable in Eno's definition may connote the genre's tether to a reductive form of background noise. Passive attention, whether that be listening or viewing, is entirely separate from a lack of attention when pertaining to the term background. Picture yourself on a walk, the sun glaring down on a batch of flowers. Bees swarm amidst the plants, and you consciously try to count them, keeping your focus on all areas made possible through your vision. You won't be able to trace the flight path of the bees without shifting the focus of your sight away from the entire setting, relaxing your eyes in the process. By refusing to focus on the environment as you normally do, an entirely separate way of seeing reveals itself. While you are omitting the equality afforded to the background and foreground of the scene, the movement becomes possible to track. Relegating unconscious active attention simultaneously results in a passive physical transformation, enabled by the revelation of a set fixation. Of course, if this scene is relegated to your peripheral vision, one would not be cognizant of any of these details. Conjured through the combination of the visual and sonic layers that propel the narrative shift from a mystery to the mystical, Jonathan Davies' 2021 film Topology of Sirens utilizes ambient music as a subject alongside its properties to conform to the viewer's state of attention through the combination of realization and repetition. As this progression occurs, the spectator's state of attention starts reaching toward an inadvertent yet functional desire for short-term narrative pleasure. The spectatorial inclinations that arise with traditional film-going habits eventually transform here into an attentional prosthesis, redefining the traditional expectations of the film-going process by eliminating its singularity. Davies' film centers around a woman named Kaz who moves into a new house and discovers a set of microcassette tapes containing experimental music. As the narrative unravels, the viewer's initial curiosity, generated via the intricate nature of the mystery, transforms into an appreciation for the atmospheric, indexical feelings generated through the tracing of Kaz's journey. Nonsensical drawings are scribbled upon cassettes that lead Kaz to investigate various avant-garde instruments, isolated media archives, and to seek out the esoteric knowledge of others. The narrative of Topology of Sirens harnesses attention in tandem with ambient music, a notion that is rendered crucial through its frequent inclusion and prominence in the work. The film begins with several long takes of Los Angeles' tranquil nature, establishing a rhythm between the sonic and visual. Fading, smooth superimposition makes way for ambient noise, working to supersede any literal change or transition in visual stasis. A meta layer immediately unravels itself in the second scene. Kaz stumbles upon an impromptu ambient performance in the middle of a secluded forest area. This unbroken shot features the first sequence of many extended musical practices that are appreciated in their entirety, all of which conform specifically to their environment. Rain stops the performance after it enhances it, signifying the inherent improvisational mutualism between field recordings and ambient. The audience's passive analytical inclination may subconsciously guide them to a narrative connection between the performance and the larger narrative. A repeated viewing will change the spectator's thought pattern, fostering a simple appreciation of the music itself. As a lone musician configures her intricate ambient setup, an artist idly observes on the left side of the frame. The woman standing to the side is played by Sarah Davachi, a composer of minimalist drones. While her fans sometimes classify her work under the term ambient, she believes that the term being used as a blanket categorization toward her body of work cannot encapsulate the entirety of what arises when listening to it. One's realization of this layer of meaning can only be spurred by interest in the material context behind the film, as well as a desire to resist the short-term gains of immersion in a diegetic world, a goal often present in cinema that prioritizes storytelling. This is prominent to the filmic identity that Topology of Sirens adopts. Instead of outright denying the capabilities of the negative qualities of instrumental reason within commonly used templates in narrative filmmaking, such as the three-act structure or the hero's journey, the movie utilizes this ambient performance to disguise its attentional prosthesis under the veil of narrative curiosity. The initial intrigue of the plot is developed through questions surrounding the tapes themselves, prompting the viewer to search for the ultimate goal to satisfy a larger question. In this case, the seemingly primary objective of the viewer is to interpolate Kaz into the role of a detective hired to answer the viewer's overarching desires. If we are accustomed to the tools of narrative filmmaking only, we use Kaz as a means to discover the answer to our basic plot-related questions. What do the sounds on the tapes mean? As the narrative progresses, the complexity of the search for answers exists only to fulfill the initial intrinsic desire of story closure. The meaning behind the tapes is approached with this goal in mind. Cryptic symbols seemingly must correlate with narrative progression. Upon further reflection, the purpose of the tapes and how they end up in Kaz's house are not relevant to the experience of the music that Kaz interacts with, paralleling how the answers we seek continue to lead toward one thing: the presence of ambient in all its forms, which retain our attention through temporal elongation and self-reflexivity. Ambient music's inherent improvisational quality stems from a consistent reimagining of sound that the artist cannot quite perceive or control. The people who guide Kaz are predetermined through her interest in the music itself. In How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, author Jenny Odell remarks, "One thing I have learned about attention is that forms of it are contagious. When you spend enough time with someone who pays close attention to something, if you were hanging out with me, it would be birds. You inevitably start to pay attention to some of the same things." Close-ups are seldom used in the film. The audience's gaze is directed toward the environment, subliminally activating the attentional prosthesis through Kaz's present-mindedness. Our interest in the mystery and music is generated through her interaction with the ambient, where the visual and auditory commingle with the nowness of nature. American musician Dan Barrett champions how mediums of art, and in particular music, have the ability to induce specific trance states. Under his solo project Giles Corey, Barrett's ambient album Deconstructionist attempts to convey the emotional extreme via cathartic walls of sound that oscillate between intensity and rumination, rendered to the forefront by atmospheric manipulation. Long takes are the weapon of choice for slow cinema filmmakers, and the entire mood of a work can be determined with an opening shot. Bellatar's Satan Tango begins with a nearly 10-minute long tracking shot that follows a group of cows, opting to cut to black abruptly, while the first shot of Gina Telleroli's Traveling Light lasts less than 60 seconds, featuring a person's point of view as they look through a hazy train window. Despite more happening in the first take, if one were to use prose to describe the scene, the opening of Satan Tango induces a feeling of slowness more quickly. However, Satan Tango is faster paced when held to traditional filmmaking standards, despite being about 8 times longer than Traveling Light, since the latter is non-narrative. From this, the viewer can infer how different durations of slowness induce various trances, not reliant on the duration itself, but outside knowledge and individual approach to the work. Barrett began his musical career with fellow Connecticut native Tim McCouga under the name Have a Nice Life, releasing their first album in 2008 titled Death Consciousness. The project cost less than $1,000 to record, and the original, highest quality recordings of the album were destroyed, giving the record a compressed-like feel. Rather than opt for higher quality sound, they embraced the accidental technical imperfection, blending it into the style of the record. Listen to the first and only ambient track on the project, a quick one before the eternal worm devours Connecticut, to experience this. When applied to the context of filmmaking, the same should be applied to film going. There is no monopoly on the professional film going space. The individual's application of attention dictates the experience, not the technical proficiency of the space or film. Ambient music rejects the classism of making music, for anything and anyone can make it. Take Steve Rodin's 2002 album, Winter Couplet. The sound composition was made using the sounds of 2 teacups and was played through 8 speakers connected to cardboard tubes. Erica Balsam's book 10 Skies, a meditation on the James Benning film of the same name, elaborates on how unconventional methods of film going hold validity. Ultimately, seeing something is better than not seeing anything. When I mentioned to Benning, not without some hesitation, that I had found the film on YouTube, his response was, sharing is caring. He seemed fine, happy even, that it was out there. The bootleg offers a degraded form of access, sure, an experience of unabashedly inferior quality, yes. I doubt anyone would come away from watching it with the feeling of having had a powerful aesthetic experience. Yet its value is not to be dismissed entirely. Approaching Topology of Sirens with this in mind speaks to its open-ended identity and ability to craft spectacle without relying on a maximalist approach. Gleaning from Barrett's philosophy outlined in the accompanying booklet of Deconstructionist, passive ambient attention can be transformed into the active as an attempt to expand the consciousness enough to include an egoless universe in a manner similar to meditation and ceremonial possession. All the technical aspects of a micro-budget film are at play here, working to achieve a hold on time established by the rhythmic tendencies, or lack of, atmospheric progression through the blurring of temporal structure. Harkening back to the ideas brought forth by Lawrence English, the ethos of ambient music can simultaneously shape a listener's experience while also conforming to their pre-existing mindset, a technique carried over when presented in slow cinematic form. American experimental filmmaker Nathaniel Dorsey's approach to constructing visual meaning reminds me of the function of track lists in ambient projects. Dorsey's text Devotional Cinema outlines the power of the cut in cinema, explaining how the technique operates visually. It prompts 2 aftershocks. He claims the first is in the area of dream connectives, or poetry, the way our mind uses images in its own nighttime arena. The implications of these cuts are bound together by a logical rhythm dependent on repetition. Poetic musings develop in relation to the difference outlined, via the personal or collective depiction of an ambient performance. Kaz's inherited collection of cassettes is only listened to through her headphones, providing the possibility of overlapping between the passive and active forms of engagement on the attention spectrum. An unfiltered connection establishes itself when the ambient is generated via the live performances, simulating the stoppage of time. Dvorsky describes the literal implications of the sequence of images that activates the logic and thought processes that are in our daytime mind. By combating the traditional transitional state depicted through classical Hollywood cinema, landscape imagery fails to reduce itself to establishing shots or B-roll, rejecting the depiction as a mere change in setting. Transitions are not made via landscapes in Topology of Sirens. The usual time granted toward them, instead, is allotted to sequences that reinforce what Dvorsky describes as sudden shifts in space caused by the cut that enliven the unnameable. Davies employs the long take, relinquishing control of the overarching narrative's goal, establishing revelation through repetition. Slowness here is a tool for introspection, representative of sound art in visual form. Barrett encourages listeners of deconstructionists to embrace this, stating, repeated listenings will actually decrease the amount of time needed to entrain fully, resulting in deeper and more profound experiences. In the diegetic world, our patience is rewarded, demonstrated through the magical realist sequence in which Kaz opens a literal and metaphorical door by ringing a bell, freeing the sirens. The sirens interact with the world around them without speaking. Dvorsky states, pure nowness transcends the passage of time. The camera moves alongside in a mystical notion, and space detaches itself from time in this scene. The notion of indexicality is brought into play here. The sirens were briefly referenced earlier in a painting, harkening back to the hidden narrative motif disguised in Cass's quest to find a hurdy-gurdy. Each woman treats the environment as an extension of themselves, representing the literal manifestation of ambient music. Personal observation is the only necessary factor to engage meaningfully with the world, and our attention doesn't need an end goal. The ending of the film, in particular, features a 5-minute-long, unbroken take in which Kaz sits on the precipice of a baseball field and listens to music. If one were to experience this in the seclusion of the theater, the nowness they would experience there would not be reduced if they were outside, watching the film on a phone, for their experience would directly mirror that of Kaz's. In an interview with Davies for Split Tooth Media, he states, the film aims to reflect the experience of being at a show where you're seeing a person play a set and there are no breaks, as well as being carried by the sound throughout its duration. Ambient live shows often follow this format, seamlessly transitioning from track to track without stopping. Kaz is frequently engaged in the specific nowness induced by ambient, completing the cyclical nature of its very goal and form. As expected by the end of the film, no grand explanation arrives in Topology of Sirens, but one's emotional state develops and conforms to the trance it generates. Attention is captured through the repetitive cycle that arises with the amorphous. Kaz's appreciation for the world and people around her transcends time, with the sirens representing her bodily consciousness and its peace with the outside world beyond her will, a feat that absolves and coerces the viewer to remove all narrative agency. The story makes way for ambient, allowing the characters to undergo the same transformative process as the audience, placing the subject and spectator on the same level of importance. While the rise of short-form video content unfortunately reduced perception of the genre to some, as that lo-fi hip-hop girl YouTube stream, AI 1000Hz brain frequency cleansing slop that optimizes playlist-driven profit, or simply background music, it has also been kind to artists such as Aphex Twin, introducing tracks like Quick Thur and the legendary Stone and Focus to a broader audience. Simply engaging with ambient will resist the commodification of your attention. Slow cinema and ambient music's ability to strip the passage of time from its narrative purpose coincides with Dvorsky's ultimate idea of nowness, establishing a film-going culture devoid of spatial requirement or authorial fundamentalism. You can watch the film for free on Tubi. Topology of Sirens utilizes the potential of nowness, turning a traditional and sometimes suffocating urban space like Los Angeles into a mystical one, while all forms of attention prevail by way of listening closely. By sometimes actively resisting the dominant narrative filmmaking structure, your attention can roam freely, finding purpose in the process. No matter where one may be, the screen large or small, an individual can see and perhaps even be a part of the ambient too. All you need to do is listen. If you'd like to support my work, please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to the channel. My Patreon is in the description for those who wish to fund future videos with their generosity. Thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it.